The change from pastoral nomadism to settled lifestyles is perhaps one of the biggest changes in world history. This was not an immediate change, however. The Stone Age began around 2 million years ago and lasted for a very long time. The Paleolithic and Neolithic ages were a part of this time period. Early foragers were hunters and gatherers. These people gathered berries and hunted their food. They were also known as nomads because they had to constantly follow the wild animals for food. About 10,000 years ago, people began to domesticate plants and animals. This was known as the Agricultural Revolution. While this process took a few thousand years, it was the beginning of what would become civilizations. Man figured out how to grow corn and wheat and also to domesticate animals they would use for food. People were finally able to settle in one place and build a home, rather than constantly moving and looking for food. The first signs of civilization are seen in present-day Iraq, known as the Fertile Crescent. Mesopotamia arose in the valley of the Tigris, bronze and copper tools, and by this time they had also invented the wheel and developed irrigation canals to aid with farming. The written record of the first civilization begins with the Sumerians, which many historians mark as a division between prehistory and history. The Sumerians were dominant around the 3rd millennium BC. The Sumerians developed the first writing called cuneiform, which is a system of writing in which a wedge-shaped stylus was used to press symbols into clay. The Rosetta Stone has helped us decipher the language of the Egyptians and also other societies around them. The Sumerians were polytheistic, which means they worshipped more than one god. They built ziggurats in honor of the gods. These elaborate structures usually resembled terraced pyramids built of clay. The social structure was headed by rulers and elite classes who controlled land, which was farmed by slaves. Sumerian slaves could purchase their freedom. Sumerian families were patriarchal, which means the father was the head of the house. Women and children could be sold in order to pay off debts. Around 1600 BC, women wore veils to cover their bodies. This is still practiced today in many Middle Eastern countries. Not much is known about women of this time. Women probably lost status and freedom with the spread of agriculture, since they no longer were providing food for the community. Sometimes they could hold power in court, serve as priests, own businesses, engage in trade, and work in factories or as prostitutes. The political structure of Mesopotamia was based on the unpredictable flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which led to the need for the government to provide irrigation systems to channel the water for irrigation. The early government was in the form of city-states, where they controlled the city as well as the surrounding areas. A lack of natural protective barriers made Mesopotamia an easy target for invasion by outsiders, so most of the cities constructed defensive walls. Constant conflicts over water and property rights made the Sumerians weaker, and they later fell to the Akkadians and Babylonians, who spread Sumerian culture. The Babylonian king Hammurabi devised the first written law code, known as the Code of Hammurabi. It was based on the theory of an eye for an eye. It had different rules for gender and social classes. They were very harsh and favored the upper class. After 900 BC, the Assyrians and Persians dominated Mesopotamia. The area of modern-day Egypt was unified under their first pharaohs in 3150 BC and survived for about 3,000 years. Pharaohs were the link between the gods and the people. They were buried in the Giza pyramids, one of the 7 wonders of the world today. When buried, all of their belongings were put in the tomb with them, and occasionally a sacrifice for the gods. The history of Egypt can be split into 3 periods: the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. The capital during the Old Kingdom was located at Memphis, while the capital during the Middle and Old Kingdoms was located at Thebes. More than 95% of the population lives on or near the Nile River. The Nile had a very predictable flooding season that the Egyptians learned and used. They were able to use it to irrigate crops. Egypt used a complex writing system called hieroglyphics, which uses a symbol for each word. The Egyptians were a polytheistic civilization. They worshipped Ra, the sun god, as their supreme deity. Egypt was a very isolated civilization due to the surrounding deserts. They made everything themselves, and by the time they discovered metal smelting, their weapons were outdated because the rest of the world had already discovered them. This is believed to have led to the downfall of the Egyptians.